In my past life, my own family actually hired someone to take me out so they could snag my billion-dollar lottery jackpot. But this time around, I got reborn right on lottery day. I can still hear my Aunt Sylvia's voice as she was talking about what they'd do with the money. If only that money was for the family, she was saying. First, we'd set up your cousin with that downtown apartment he's been eyeing. Maybe get him that sports car too. And if that's not enough, well, you can chip in too. I just smiled and shoved the lottery ticket deeper into my pocket. Yeah, if I hit it big, I'll make sure my cousin gets everything he needs, I replied, my voice steady despite knowing exactly what would happen. Last time, I'd been so excited to share the news. Last time, I'd trusted them. Last time, they killed me for it. Aunt Sylvia had no idea I remembered everything. The bitter taste of the poisoned tea, the way Uncle Martin watched me collapse on the living room floor, how they both stared as I gasped my final breaths. All so they could claim my winnings as next of kin. But fate gave me a second chance, and this time I wasn't about to waste it. This time the money would be mine, and they'd never even know I had it. They only call when they need something from me, money, usually. But this time around, I wasn't playing their game. I had the winning numbers memorized and a plan that would change everything. See, getting the money wasn't the hard part. Living with the knowledge that the people who raised me would murder me for it, that's what keeps me up at night. But I'm not that naive girl anymore. This time, I'm 10 steps ahead. I'm going to get my billions, disappear from their lives, and leave them with nothing but regrets. The funny thing about Rebirth is how it changes you. Death has a way of making you see people for who they really are. And my dear uncle and aunt, they're about to learn that messing with me was the biggest mistake of their lives. Aunt Sylvia had called just as I finished my shift at the corner cafe. It was the usual drill. Sob stories about bills, my cousin's needs, and how they were practically dying without my help. I'd been their financial punching bag since college, handing over chunks of every paycheck because they'd sacrificed so much to raise me after my parents died. Emma, we need to discuss the house situation, Aunt Sylvia was saying, her voice sickly sweet. The heating's busted again, and your cousin's coming home from grad school soon. His room needs renovating. In my past life, I would have immediately offered my savings. This time, I played dumb. Oh, that sounds expensive. The cafe cut my hours last week, and I'm barely covering my own rent. We took you in when no one else would, she snapped, the sweetness evaporating. The least you could do is help family. I bit my tongue. They hadn't taken me in. They'd gotten a fat insurance payout from my parents' death and monthly checks for my care, until I turned 18. Money that never seemed to benefit me. I'll see what I can do, I said softly, hanging up before she could demand a specific amount. I checked my wallet. Exactly $200 left after paying my bills, and tomorrow was lottery day. The Mega Billions jackpot had hit $1 billion, just like last time. I knew the winning combination by heart. 715, 2340, 859 with Mega Ball 12. Numbers that had changed and ended my life. Last time, I'd gone straight to their house after winning, bursting with excitement to share the news. Uncle Martin had poured me that celebratory tea while Aunt Sylvia called my cousin. By midnight, I was dead from what they claimed was a tragic allergic reaction, and they were planning how to spend my money. I shuddered at the memory of my own death. The burning sensation as the poison spread through my body. The way they watched, not even pretending to call for help. This time would be different. On lottery day, I bought my ticket early, carefully marking those fateful numbers. Then, I went home to my tiny apartment and waited for the drawing. When the numbers flashed on my TV screen, exactly as I remembered, I didn't scream or dance like last time. I just calmly folded the ticket and placed it in a sealed envelope inside my locked desk drawer. My phone rang almost immediately. Emma! Aunt Sylvia's voice was shrill with excitement. Did you get a lottery ticket? They just announced someone in our area won the billion-dollar jackpot." Of course, they knew I bought tickets regularly. It was one of the habits they used to mock me for wasting money. Now they were fishing to see if I'd hit the jackpot again. "No luck," I lied smoothly. I was too busy working extra shifts to bother this week. The disappointment in her silence was palpable. "Oh, well, someone out there is certainly lucky." "Very lucky," I agreed, unable to keep a small smile from my voice. "Anyway, I wanted to let you know I can only send $50 this month for house repairs." She started to protest, but I cut her off. "I've got to go. Early shift tomorrow. Love you both." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, heart racing. Phase 1 complete. I had the winning ticket and they had no idea. Now came the tricky part. I needed to claim the money without them finding out. Last time, I'd gone public with my win, face splashed across every local newspaper. This time, I contacted the Lottery Commission first thing in the morning and arranged to claim my prize anonymously through a trust. I met with an attorney who specialised in sudden wealth, not the one who had supposedly helped my aunt and uncle settle my affairs after my death. This time, I chose a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for discretion. $1 billion, she said calmly when I presented the winning ticket. "And you want complete anonymity." "Absolute secrecy," I confirmed. "My family cannot know I've won." She raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. "We'll set up a blind trust. Your name will never appear on any public record related to this win." As she outlined the process, I couldn't help but think about what my aunt and uncle would do when the winner was announced as anonymous. They'd be furious, desperate to know who had claimed the prize they believed should have been theirs. 2 weeks later, I sat in the lawyer's office as she confirmed the transfer of funds, $435 million after taxes, taken as a lump sum. "The funds are now in your new accounts," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Diversified as we discussed. The trust paperwork is complete, and your identity is protected." I'd secretly purchased a condo in a secure building downtown and already started the process of applying for a job in another state. As far as my aunt and uncle would know, I'd simply be moving for a better opportunity. That evening, Aunt Sylvia called again. "Emma, have you heard? They still haven't announced who won the lottery. It must be someone local trying to hide it. Probably someone with something to hide." Her voice dripped with suspicion. "Maybe they just want privacy," I said, keeping my tone light. $1 billion would attract a lot of attention. "Family should share with family," Uncle Martin's voice suddenly boomed in the background. "Only selfish people keep windfalls to themselves." I had to bite back a laugh at the irony. "I suppose. Anyway, I have some news. I've been offered a job in Seattle, better pay, benefits. I'm taking it." The silence that followed was telling. They'd been counting on keeping me close, financially dependent on their approval. "Seattle?" Aunt Sylvia finally sputtered. "But that's across the country. What about family?" "I'll visit," I lied, "and I'll send money when I can." "We raised you," Uncle Martin cut in sharply. "After everything we've done." "Which is why I need to stand on my own 2 feet," I interrupted. "You've always wanted me to be successful, right?" They couldn't argue without revealing their true feelings. Instead, Aunt Sylvia's voice turned honey-sweet again. "At least come for dinner before you go. This Sunday, your favourite pot roast." My blood ran cold. Sunday dinner was how they'd lured me over last time, the night they'd poisoned me. "I'd love to," I said, already planning to be mysteriously called into work at the last minute. Over the next month, I carefully extracted myself from their lives. Each time they invited me over, I had a convenient excuse. Each time they asked for money, I sent just enough to avoid suspicion, but mentioned increasing financial struggles. I sold most of my belongings, telling them I was downsizing for the move. Meanwhile, my new life was taking shape. My downtown condo was furnished and waiting. My financial advisor had set up a structured system for managing my wealth. I had a new phone, new email, even a new name legally established through my trust. The weekend before my move to Seattle, I finally agreed to their dinner invitation. I had no intention of eating or drinking anything, but I wanted to see them one last time, to memorize the faces of the people who had once killed me for money. I arrived at the familiar suburban house, the home they'd raised me in after my parents' accident, the same house where I died. Emma! Aunt Sylvia pulled me into a tight hug. She was wearing her pearls, the ones she only wore for special occasions. "We've missed you so much." Uncle Martin clapped me on the shoulder, his large hand lingering uncomfortably. "Job all set up in Seattle?" "Everything's arranged," I said, stepping past him into the house. The living room was exactly as I remembered it from my last night alive. The floral couch, the antique coffee table, the fireplace where they'd burned my purse and phone after I died. "I made tea," Aunt Sylvia said, gesturing to the china set on the coffee table. My tea had been poisoned last time, something tasteless that had paralysed me before stopping my heart. "Actually, I brought my own drink," I said, pulling a sealed water bottle from my purse. "Doctor's orders. I'm on a new medication." The flash of annoyance in her eyes was unmistakable, but quickly masked. "Of course, dear, your health comes first." Throughout dinner, they probed for details about my new job and apartment in Seattle. I fed them carefully crafted lies. A mid-level management position, a modest apartment with a roommate, nothing that would suggest sudden wealth. "And will you still be sending money for the house repairs?" Uncle Martin asked bluntly over dessert. "Martin," Aunt Sylvia scolded, though I knew it was just for show. "It's a fair question," he insisted. "Family supports family." I gave them a regretful smile. "I'll have to see how my budget works out in Seattle. The cost of living is much higher there." His face darkened, but Aunt Sylvia quickly changed the subject. "At least you'll be making something of yourself, dear. We always knew you had potential." The contempt beneath her words was familiar. In their eyes, I'd never amounted to much. Just a burden they'd been forced to bear, useful only for the money I could provide. How differently they treated me during those few hours when they thought I was a billionaire, before they decided they'd rather have the money without me. As I prepared to leave, Aunt Sylvia pressed a small package into my hands. "A little going-away gift. Don't open it until you get home." I thanked her, knowing I would never open it. The last gift they'd given me had been that fatal cup of tea. "You'll call when you arrive in Seattle?" Uncle Martin asked, his eyes boring into mine. "Of course," I promised, knowing it would be the last lie I ever told them. Back at my apartment, I dropped the package unopened into the trash. Tomorrow, Emma Parker would disappear, and Alexandra Bennett, billionaire with a new identity, would begin her real life. My last act as Emma was to schedule a sizable transfer to their bank account, $50,000, to be delivered a week after my move. Enough to make them think I'd been hiding some money all along, but not enough to suggest anything close to the jackpot. Enough to make them regret how they treated me, but not enough to make them suspicious about the lottery. A parting gift and a final goodbye from the niece they'd once murdered. 6 months later, I sipped champagne on the balcony of my penthouse in Manhattan, about as far from Seattle as I could reasonably get. My financial empire was growing steadily under careful management. I'd started a foundation in my parents' names that was making real differences in children's lives, and I was finally learning to enjoy my wealth without looking over my shoulder. My phone buzzed with a news alert from my old hometown. I rarely checked them anymore, but something made me open this one. "Local couple arrested for insurance fraud and suspected homicide," the headline read. Below it were the mug shots of Uncle Martin and Aunt Sylvia. I nearly dropped my glass. The article detailed how investigators had reopened the case of a young woman who had died mysteriously years ago. Not me, but another relative who had lived with them briefly before I was born. New evidence suggested they had taken out a large life insurance policy on her just months before her accidental death. The pattern of behaviour that had led to my murder in another lifetime was finally catching up to them. The $50,000 I'd sent had apparently triggered their greed again. They tried the same insurance scheme with another distant relative, but this time someone had asked questions. I set down my phone and looked out over the city lights. They would never know that their greatest victim had not only survived but was thriving. They would never get their hands on my money or hurt me again. Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways, across lifetimes even. I raised my glass in a silent toast to second chances, and the sweet taste of a revenge served so cold they'd never even know they'd been served. The foundation I started grew faster than I anticipated. The New Beginnings Foundation became known for funding innovative projects that helped orphan children and victims of financial abuse. No one connected Alexandra Bennett, the reclusive philanthropist, with Emma Parker, the unremarkable girl who had supposedly moved to Seattle and fallen off the grid. I kept tabs on my aunt and uncle's case from afar. They were convicted not only of fraud, but of the murder of that distant relative from years ago. Physical evidence from that old case combined with their suspicious pattern of gaining financially from family tragedies sealed their fate. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison, never knowing how close they'd come to getting away with another murder. Mine. I sometimes wondered if my cousin knew what his parents had done. He'd never been particularly kind to me, always treating me as competition for his parents' resources rather than family. After their arrest, he tried to cash in on their notoriety with tell-all interviews about growing up with monsters, conveniently omitting how he'd benefited from their schemes. About a year into my new life, I received a strange email forwarded through layers of privacy protection. It was from my cousin, somehow directed to Alexandra Bennett, the philanthropist. "I believe we have common interests," it read. "I have information about the Parker family that might interest your foundation's work on financial predators. My parents, Martin and Sylvia Parker, perfected techniques your research team should know about. I'm willing to share everything for appropriate compensation." My blood ran cold. Had he somehow figured out who I really was? Or was this just a shot in the dark, attempting to monetize his connection to criminals by approaching wealthy foundations? I had my security team investigate. They discovered he'd sent similar emails to dozens of wealthy individuals and foundations, offering insider information on various topics for money. He was drowning in debt since his parents' assets had been frozen and was desperately trying to cash in on their infamy. I decided to respond, not as his supposedly dead cousin, but as the philanthropist he was trying to manipulate. "Mr. Parker," I wrote, "the New Beginnings Foundation appreciates your offer but cannot offer compensation for such information. However, we have comprehensive support programs for those affected by family trauma. If you're struggling, we can connect you with appropriate resources." I included links to legitimate support services and financial counselling, not out of forgiveness, but because it amused me to offer charity to someone who would have happily watched me die for money. He never responded, and my security team informed me that he eventually left town, chased by debt collectors. The last anyone heard, he was working minimum wage jobs and living in a motel. The lifestyle he'd been accustomed to, maintained by his parents' schemes, had vanished. As my second year of new life began, I decided to visit my parents' graves for the first time since my rebirth. I flew privately to a small airfield near my hometown and drove a nondescript rental car to the cemetery, wearing a disguise subtle enough not to attract attention, but sufficient to prevent recognition. The quiet cemetery was empty that Monday morning. I found their side-by-side headstones easily, maintained and with fresh flowers. The groundskeeper explained that an anonymous donor had arranged perpetual care for the plot. In my previous life, I had set that up just before I died. In this timeline, I'd made the same arrangement through my foundation. Standing there, I finally allowed myself to grieve properly, not just for my parents, but for the life I'd lost, and the innocence that had been stolen when my own family murdered me for money. "I made it," I whispered to their headstones. "They didn't win this time." As I turned to leave, I noticed an older woman watching me from several rows away. There was something familiar about her, the local librarian who had been kind to me as a child, always slipping me extra books when my aunt and uncle weren't looking. She had been one of the few adults who had shown me genuine kindness. For a moment, I feared she'd recognize me despite my disguise, but she simply nodded respectfully, one mourner acknowledging another's grief, before turning back to tend a grave of her own. That evening, back in my Manhattan penthouse, I made a decision. I would stop looking backward. The aunt and uncle who had killed me were paying for their crimes. My cousin was facing the consequences of his entitled life. Justice, in its own way, had been served. It was time to truly begin my second chance at life. I established a scholarship in my old name, the Emma Parker Memorial Scholarship for orphan students pursuing education. It was my way of acknowledging the girl I had been while embracing who I had become. The official story was that it had been endowed by an anonymous donor who had known Emma before she disappeared. Months later, I received a pile of thank you letters from the first recipients. Reading their stories of overcoming loss and finding hope reminded me of my own journey. Many mentioned that, while researching the scholarship's namesake, they'd found almost nothing about Emma Parker, just that she had been orphaned young, raised by relatives, and vanished after moving across country for work. She had left no mark on the world. But Alexandra Bennett was making that mark now, with every child helped and every life changed. My financial advisors continued to grow my lottery winnings into an even larger fortune. I developed a passion for sustainable investing and began funding green technology startups that promised to change the world for the better. Money that my aunt and uncle would have wasted on status symbols and short-term pleasures was now powering innovation and progress. 3 years after my rebirth, I finally allowed myself to date again. I met Julian at a charity gala, a brilliant architect with kind eyes who knew me only as Alexandra, the somewhat mysterious philanthropist. When he asked about my family, I told him a version of the truth, that they were gone, and I had made my own way. On our 5th date, walking through Central Park as autumn leaves fell around us, he asked more deeply about my past. "You never talk about your life before New Beginnings Foundation," he said gently. "I know there's more to your story." I considered how much to share. The full truth would sound insane. Who would believe a story of murder, rebirth, and a lottery ticket across timelines? "I got a second chance at life," I said finally. "Not many people do. My family wasn't what they seemed. They taught me that sometimes the people who should love you the most can hurt you the worst." He didn't press for details, just took my hand. "I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad you got that second chance." "Me too," I said, squeezing his hand back. "Every day I make sure it wasn't wasted." 6 months later, Julian proposed. Before giving him my answer, I decided he deserved to know more truth, if not the impossible parts. "My name wasn't always Alexandra Bennett," I told him one night in the privacy of my penthouse. "I changed it to escape a toxic family situation. They would have killed me for money if they'd had the chance." I shared a version of my story that omitted the supernatural elements, that I had won a significant sum of money and realised my aunt and uncle were planning to harm me for it. So I had claimed it anonymously and disappeared. Julian listened without judgment. When I finished, he took both my hands in his. "Alexandra, Emma, whatever name you choose, you're the woman I want to spend my life with. You survived, you thrived, and you've used your pain to help others. That's who you are to me." I said yes. Our wedding was small and private, attended only by the genuine friends I'd made in my new life. As I spoke my vows to Julian, I felt truly free of my past for the first time. No more looking over my shoulder, no more nightmares about poisoned tea. A year later, I gave birth to our daughter. We named her Hope, because that's what my second chance had given me. As I held her in my arms, I made a silent promise that she would grow up surrounded by genuine love, not the counterfeit version my aunt and uncle had offered. Sometimes I still think about my first death. The shock and betrayal I felt as I realised the people who raised me had murdered me for money. But those thoughts come less frequently now. Instead, I focus on the foundation helping children like I once was, on my growing family, and on the future I've built from the ashes of that past life. The billions I won changed everything, not just materially, but by showing me who my family truly was, and giving me the chance to create something better. Money doesn't buy happiness, but in my case, it bought me time. Time to live the life that had been stolen from me. And that second chance? It's worth more than all the lottery winnings in the world. 5 years into my second life, I received news that Uncle Martin had died in prison. Aunt Sylvia followed just months later. Their deaths made barely a ripple in the news. A small article noting the passing of the insurance fraud killers, who had died without ever confessing to their crimes. My cousin attempted to contact me again, or rather to contact Alexandra Bennett, this time claiming to be writing a book about surviving a legacy of family crime and seeking an endorsement from my foundation. My assistant politely declined. As for me, I continued to build my life, raising my daughter, working with my foundation, and expanding our family when we welcomed a son 2 years later. Julian's architectural firm flourished, designing sustainable buildings across the world, many funded through my investments. On the 10th anniversary of my rebirth, I visited my hometown one final time. The house where I had grown up and died had been sold after my aunt and uncle's arrest. It had been renovated beyond recognition by the new owners, all traces of my past erased. I stood across the street for a few minutes, watching a young family playing in the yard where I had once felt so alone. Then, I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind for good. That evening, I attended the gala, celebrating the 10th anniversary of the New Beginnings Foundation. We had helped over 10,000 children by then, providing education, housing, and mental health support to those who, like me, had lost their families or escaped toxic ones. As I took the stage to give my speech, I looked out at the room full of supporters, beneficiaries, and my own family sitting in the front row. Julian held our daughter on his lap while our son, still a toddler, played quietly with a toy. 10 years ago, I began, I got a second chance at life. I had lost everything, or so I thought. What I discovered was that sometimes we need to lose everything to find out what we're truly capable of building. I didn't mention the lottery or my past life's murder. I didn't need to. The message was universal. Life can give you second chances if you're brave enough to take them. After the applause died down and we were back home, Julian found me on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned into his embrace. "I was just thinking about luck. Everyone thinks winning the lottery is the luckiest thing that can happen to someone." "And you don't?" I turned to face him, taking in his kind eyes and the life we'd built together. "No. The luckiest thing is getting a second chance to live the life you were meant to have all along." He kissed me softly. "Well, I'm grateful for whatever brought you here." Later that night, as Julian slept beside me, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. From death to rebirth, from betrayal to true love. From a family that valued money over my life to creating one based on genuine love. The $1 billion had been just money. The real wealth was what I'd done with my second chance. And as I drifted off to sleep, safe in the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, I wondered if somewhere out there, another soul was getting their own second chance to rewrite their story. I hoped they'd make it count, just as I had.